All right, here on the board we have a cross-sectional view of the spinal cord. The spinal cord has what we call white matter to the outside here, and then to the inside of this shape here, it's kind of a butterfly-like shape, or an overall H shape. The tissue is called gray matter. So we have gray matter in here, we have white matter out here. The gray matter contains the neurons of the nervous system and many of the nerve fibers in here. So you find your clusters of neurons in here. Out in the white matter, you have primarily myelinated fibers that are extending up and down the spinal cord. So we refer to this as gray matter in here, and there's what we call a dorsal horn and a ventral horn of gray matter. So here is our dorsal horn of gray matter. And down here is our ventral horn of gray matter. And outside of that we have our white matter. In the middle of everything, right in the very center, is where we find our central canal. Now these parts that I've identified here, the dorsal horn of gray matter, the ventral horn of gray matter, the white matter to the outside, and the central canal, those are all within what we call the spinal cord. That's what became of the original neural tube that formed during the embryonic development. Out from that we have parts of the peripheral nervous system. It's not part of the central nervous system here. The peripheral nervous system out over here. This is a spinal nerve. Spinal nerves come out between vertebrae, lateral to the vertebrae. And after they come in from the periphery, they split into a dorsal branch and a ventral branch. We call the upper branch a dorsal root. And down here, this is called a ventral root. So two different roots to that single spinal nerve out there. Now the dorsal root along its path has this enlargement, this swelling right here. It can be called a dorsal root ganglion, or it can be called the sensory ganglion. So these are the primary parts of a cross-section of the spinal cord that you should be able to identify. Now we are going to identify some of the nerve fibers and cells that are involved in a normal reflex arc here in a minute. But to introduce that concept, this spinal nerve has nerve fibers that carry signals out toward the periphery, and it has neural signals that are coming in, sensory signals from the periphery. So the sensory signals all go in through this dorsal route, the dorsal root of the spinal nerve, and there's a cell inside the sensory ganglion that receives that nerve fiber. So coming in right here, there's going to be a nerve fiber to a cell, right there, a ganglion cell. It's a kind of nerve cell, and that ganglion cell is going to relay that signal into the spinal cord, gray matter, in the dorsal horn region. So we're going to look at the relay signal of a simple reflex arc next. All right, now for the simple reflex arc. We learn the simple reflex arc because it's kind of basic to understanding how the nervous system works overall. Just a simplified version of what's going on in the nervous system. First of all, we know we have incoming information and outgoing information. All of the incoming information to your spinal cord down here is going to come in through nerve fibers that meet up with a ganglion cell here in the dorsal root ganglion, that sensory ganglion. That cell is going to have a nerve fiber that extends from it on into the gray matter in the dorsal horn of the spinal cord. At that point, we're going to have a nerve cell that will be able to pick up that neural signal, and it will, in a reflex arc, it will relay that signal down to the ventral horn of gray matter down here. And down here in the ventral horn of gray matter, there's going to be a motor neuron, and that motor neuron will receive the signal and respond by sending a message out the other direction. So that's an outgoing motor signal going that way. So this is a simple reflex arc. We're going to identify all the parts in that reflex arc now. We can call this incoming information route right here along that red line. That is the sensory dendrite. We're going to call it that for here anyhow. That incoming signal to the ganglion cell here. So this is a sensory ganglion cell. Next, the fiber that comes from that ganglion cell to the gray matter, this fiber right here, is the sensory axon. The next cell in our route here, this one right here, we're going to call that an association neuron. Association neuron. So it receives that signal from the sensory ganglion cell. The association neuron is going to relay that signal from the dorsal gray matter to the ventral gray matter. And so this is an axon that travels between the two. So this axon right here is going to be our association axon. Now, the association neuron can be called an accessory neuron, sometimes called an interneuron. So it's intermediate, it goes between an interneuron, it's an accessory, it helps things out, or it's an association neuron. Either of those terms have been used for that relay signal between the sensory information and the motor information. Next, we have our motor neuron, right here. And its axon, so this is the motor axon right here. And that's a simple reflex arc. Incoming information goes through the dorsal root of the spinal nerve to the sensory ganglion cell here, along that fiber, and then we relay into the gray matter with the sensory axon. There we meet up with the association neuron, which relays down to the ventral horn of gray matter, where we find our motor neuron, and the motor neuron then can initiate a signal to go back out. It's kind of a reflex arc. We usually think of like tapping the knee with a hammer to make the foot move out. Or if you were to touch something hot and jerk away really quickly, that might be a kind of reflex arc involved there. But anyway, this is the basic pattern of incoming and outgoing information in a simple reflex arc.